one.
It's so hard to beat these world-class players. You don't get many chances, but that was a glorious opportunity. He carved it out with great opening prep. He used one of his big weapons there. You can't repeat the same opening again. And to mess it up, to get impatient, he just rushed. He had 3.5 minutes when he went for that sequence that fizzled out immediately to a drawn endgame. It's bizarre. That shows nerves are a real thing here at the Esports World Cup.
It was very much the equivalent of in other sports. Football, for example, everything set up beautifully, excellent cross, everyone in the right place, and you just lack that finishing touch. 3.5 minutes playing one there. Arjun had the opportunity to turn the screw and he couldn't quite make it stick, but goldfish memory mode. He needs now to forget it because he needs to try and do it again with the black pieces this time against Firouzja, and he struggled last time out.
He switched things up slightly. Instead of allowing the capture in the center, forcing the black knight to move, we saw all those knight jumps. Instead, he took the pawn first preemptively, forcing the white queen to come out and recapture, regain on c4. There's no need to rush. We might see both sides here just develop their pieces, get castled. But it does feel like Firouzja, he's been studying these types of positions, being ketos, and he realizes it might be a bit of a weakness for Arjun Erigaisi.
And the more difficult thing for Arjun to deal with is that, now he can't dictate the nature of play in this one. Starting with the black pieces, Firouzja chooses a line, fan-ketoing the bishop, a more solid approach to the position. We're not going to be seeing any of those crazy battles like we did in Game 2, which worked out perfectly on the clock and on the board, giving Arjun that massive, massive win chance, which was completely his to blow. And now we see a6, it's threatening to defend that pawn potentially. So this might be the moment to capture c4, or will Alireza sort of take the fight by going castling and delaying the idea of the recapture?
Sooner or later, Alireza will have to take back that pawn on c4 with his queen. There's no other reason the queen should be sitting out there on the side of the board. He's just trying to work out whether now or later is the best moment for that.
You have to time it well. The point is, what Arjun set up is that if you capture the pawn, he wants to push the b pawn all the way up to b5, creating a beautiful development pattern, coming out with tempo, placing the bishop on b7. You want to be able to challenge the Catalan bishop.
Sounds great, doesn't it?
It really does. It is the main idea for black to get into the game.
And obviously can't quite do it at the moment because you run into the threat of knight takes pawn, but there will be that possibility to sort of push that up as the rest of the pieces develop. So yeah, the pawn will eventually fall, but there's interesting to choose how you want to do it.
Yeah, and interesting that he brings his bishop out first. He wants to hit the c7 pawn when the white queen does recapture on c4. He's delayed castling, and it's fascinating to see both kings still in the middle when they've had so many opportunities to get castled. Now the black knight lands on the edge of the board. Again, don't try this type of chess at home. It can backfire. Both sides playing very risky, very ambitiously in these early stages. I'm surprised that Firouzja is doing this, actually. He could have just taken that pawn back, had a very stable position, and been happy in the lead in this match.
Sometimes do we think we're almost shuffling around different move orders, having some subtle differences to basically try and wind our opponent up and gain time on the clock, because the result of all of this is that Erigaisi is about to squeeze out a 1-minute advantage out of the opening.
And that might seem small right now, but it's a long game ahead. It could come, and it will come to benefit, because critical moments here do lie in front of both these players. This last move, knight h5, it comes with a threat, right? Creating imbalances. Knight takes bishop is a trade. It might be fine for white. It might be fine for black. But long term, you know that it will give Arjun the chance to fight for more with that dark squared bishop unchallenged. It's been denied. Alireza comes back with his bishop, and now asking the question, what's your knight at the edge of the board even doing?
And we'll find out. First, that sequence we were discussing has come to pass. The white queen stepping back. The big question now is whether Arjun Erigaisi will develop his bishop to b7, to the longest diagonal, and challenge. There is some tension over there on the queen side. White could push a pawn to a4. Does feel like black, unless he's able to strike in the center very, very quickly, still will feel some pressure. Again, though, it's clear the strategy from Firouzja. He's playing much more positionally, much more strategically and kind of classically than he's used to. I think this is aimed and tailored specially against Erigaisi.
He's targeting Arjun's brand of chess here, and it's actually a strategy that we've seen many of the top players do against Arjun, you know. Sometimes just take it to an endgame, get the queens off the board, keep the position blocked, have a more solid positional fight. Right. Because Arjun intuitively, instinctively as a player, wants to still go ahead and sort of create a mess where the position doesn't demand. And that very often backfires at the elite level when you're not ready for it, when it's not the position that's screaming for it. So for Arjun, a little more difficult, I think, to play these kind of positions. Alireza knows it better than anyone. He's aiming for it. Bishop b7, shock castle on the board. And again, the big question for Arjun, that knight at the edge, at some point, it needs to find itself back in the game.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe just a retreat back to f6 is the most sensible option here. We'll see if he chooses to move that knight. We did have a little bit of a think, meaning that the clock situation has sort of normalized again. We no longer have that minute advantage, and in fact, Firouzja is now the player up on the clock. So some fairly natural moves being played, and both sides not quite squeezing out that sort of advantage. This time in game number one was a very different story as far as time was concerned. This feels a lot better managed overall.
Yes, absolutely. You know, you've got Arjun now under 7 minutes, so pretty tight on the clock so far, with Alireza managing to get a bit up there. I will tell you one thing about these positions in Catalan. If Black is able to break with that c-pawn moving ahead, c5, and I think that's what he's setting up right now, Arjun is, usually Black's doing fine out of the opening. c5 is the break in Catalan that you're always aiming for. And it needs to be stopped at all costs. Right now, Alireza has to find a way to make sure that Arjun doesn't successfully break out with it, resolving all the weak pawn, backward pawns, problems that's usually the bane of Catalan's existence.
And there are a few ways to fight against this pawn push that he's kind of declaring is his intention, Arjun Erigaisi. One, Firouzja can slide his rook across. There we go. Make it slightly uncomfortable if the position opens up, I was going to say, against the black queen. But the black queen does slide. The other would have been pushing the white A pawn forward to try to undermine black's structure over there. But the computer hates this decision. Wow. He's down a pawn. If he gets one more move, he's doing great here, Arjun. If he plays knight takes pawn on the next turn, but maybe this can be prevented.
But this is the point we were discussing, right? When there's no need to go all out in the position, somehow Arjun always does it. He wants to make things more direct. That's the kind of chess that he likes, you know, more concrete play on the board. And not every time it works. Right now, there's probably a resource that Alireza has. You know, you could slide the rook over. You did it once against the black queen. Get the other rook onto the game. Ask questions. Are you really brave enough to take that knight takes pawn and walk into the deadly pins?
And the interesting thing is as well, like the build-up to that looked very natural. The c5 break, of course, a long-term plan. Moving the rook across, trying to get more pieces behind the c-file. It all looks really natural. But the eval bar is telling us a very different story, and we're saying this is way too risky. Knight takes on b5. Hello.
Wow, he could have kept that up his sleeve, Firouzja. He could have just moved the white queen out the way and played this move next. But let's break down what's about to happen. The queens are both hit simultaneously. The white knight hits the black queen. Black knight hits the white queen. If here he takes the queen off the board, then the white rook saves itself and recaptures. At the end, once the dust settles, the white rook hits the bishop, the black knight hit too. We might see a rook trade, and at the end, white a clear pawn to the good. The black knight as well, looking a bit misplaced on b3. If we go back and see what happens if the white knight is captured, then it's the black knight that will fall. And if a takes b5 here, rook takes the knight on c5, black queen hit, black pawn hit, game over. 2 clear pawns is just too much at this level.
Wow, knight takes pawn, instantly played by Alireza. I think you just ignore that question mark that just appeared on the board with the lines that you just demonstrated. That knight, capturing that knight is a bad idea. Capturing that queen is a bad idea for Arjun Erigaisi. That just leaves one option, right? You have to run away with your own queen. But that means White's just picked up that pawn for free.
It looks like a clear pawn advantage. The computer gives this a question mark, we should mention. Because there was something better, the white queen could have slid across to a3, and he could have gone for this in a slightly better scenario, maybe without allowing a queen trade, but ultimately white still has the advantage. That's the key. Firouzja saw a good move. Why look for a better one? He played it very, very quickly after just 8 seconds, this tactic from Firouzja, and it really hit Arjun hard. He did not see this coming. A minute and a half down and a pawn down for Arjun here.
It's a tough decision. Can't take the knight, and I'm just wondering what happens if black was to move the queen away, because you're still hitting the white queen. You've got attack on the white knight as well, but this would give Alireza the opportunity to go on the counter offense of actually hitting the pinned knight on c5. Sure, you can take the knight on b5, but thank you very much. The bishop comes onto the game. You're hitting the queen, you're hitting the pawn, the white rook ready to swoop into the position. This is looking great for Alireza as well.
And this looks like it's about to happen. The queen move here is the key for white. He needs to just lift his queen up one square to b4 to maintain the big advantage. He doesn't go for it though. He trades off. Still better, still a pawn up, but now black has the bishop pair, at least as some solace here, some compensation.
Wow. This game is absolutely wild. The knight comes back, was hitting the bishop now defended. Yes, you're down a pawn. In compensation, the piece activity. The knight still, though, at the edge of the board for Arjun Erigaisi. For Alireza Firouzja, he's also got control on the D line. I'm still taking the extra pawn here.
A lot of complications, a lot to calculate as well for both of these players, and that's part of the reason why maybe those trades ended up having to take place so quickly. Arjun Erigaisi down to just over 4 minutes on the clock and forcing Firouzja to think about what he wants to do next. Light squared bishops get traded off now. Simplifying it probably favors the side with less time, and Arjun was very uncomfortable earlier, so if the position continues to slowly improve and he slowly starts to feel a little bit better about his prospects in this game, about the fact that he's not down so much on the clock, that can only be good for him.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, this is still an advantage for white. The eval bar says 0.7. That reflects the fact that he is one pawn up, but I do feel that Firouzja sold his advantage short, and that, as well as the added simplicity here, the clock scenario not as bad as it was for Arjun, gives some hope at least. A win for Firouzja in this game would be huge, so Arjun needs to lock this down, somehow work his way to a draw, but ultimately it is one of those two result positions. If he plays super well, Arjun wins back the pawn, he can hold, but it's very unlikely that black is going to win this game now.
It's a very practical decision here by Alireza. You know, he didn't want to take too much time on the clock. He went for a line that feels absolutely safe for white, and look at that, he doesn't even rush to capture the bishop. He doesn't want to spoil his pawn formation.
Yep.
Does not want to disconnect those pawns. He first lines up the rook on c1. He's about to capture that bishop with a piece, not a pawn.
Positionally, though, what that means is you're trading off all of your minor pieces, except for the one on the board that you moved to h5 on move 8. So there's a little bit of rebuilding that needs to happen positionally for Arjun Erigaisi here, because everything else is about to get traded off. Queen moves to a5, and you can't ignore the knight any longer.
And I just want to mention, Arjun missed this rook move. Like, his heart rate suddenly went up over 10 beats per minute. And yeah, he definitely missed this pin. It also caused him to spend 30 seconds, which he doesn't really have. We'll now see most likely a rook take this black bishop. There's still a pin, so there's no rush. But if we see a rook trade, queens and knights still on the board, white will have a passed c-pawn. Instead, he jumps forward, asking for some tactics, some trickery in the air. Maybe he'll just recapture this black bishop now with the white knight, just to keep his pawns intact.
Well, capture the bishop, not the pawn. The king would have slid over and started attacking the knight, which would have no place to retreat on the board. So now we see Arjun, in fact, retreating with the knight. Alireza has been successful in his mission of making sure that the pawn formation, that extra pawn on the queen flank, they remain intact. They're connected pawns. No weaknesses given to Arjun Erigaisi.
Yeah, one pawn advantage, 1 minute and a bit advantage for Alireza here. Still going to be difficult, though. A long, long road to conversion. Here, it would be eased so much for white if there were a queen trade, but it still takes a few moves to try and initiate that. So he does lift up his queen. Maybe he'll centralize her next. Rook trade possibly helps as well. I think the one thing to avoid, depends on the circumstances, is a knight trade. And rook endgames might be the one place where Arjun can seek some safety. In the meantime, the white queen hit and might have to retreat. Not too many safe squares. Ooh,
Oh,
flashy move.
flashy.
Wow, okay.
Stylish.
Like that. Exclam given to it, of course. You're ignoring the safety of your own rook to give a check. So, of course, you have the option of a queen takes rook for both sides. Now, that will still equate to the exchange of rooks, so potentially simplifying the position there. Choosing instead to avoid all exchanges, and this is suddenly looking very, very good for Firouzja.
The pieces have infiltrated, the white queen centralizes. Maybe there was something even better there. The white rook could have slid into the far right corner there to the h8 square, threatening some checkmates, but still very, very strong here. The white queen, beautifully placed. The black knight was bad on h5. It's now totally immobilized on f6. It's pinned. It's feeling uncomfortable. Firouzja definitely playing safety first chess, trying to get some quick moves on the board, maybe realizing 1.5 extra minutes on the clock is going to be like having a second pawn advantage, but still not out of this, Arjun. He's defended very well. Despite the fact he's still suffering, he's still in this game.
I'm surprised by that gear shift by Firouzja, you know, going forward and then retreats the queen, retreats the rook to keep things safe. When there were more active possibilities, something that, you know, we've seen Alireza do so many times. He could have gone for Arjun's king with the rook and queen lined up on that 8th rank. Now he's still got to build that attack or offer those trades. As all the pieces remain, it's far from over right now. You know, as long as there are knights on the board, anything can happen.
He's thinking about the clock. It's got to be. When you have the rook and the queen on the 8th, it's natural that I was looking across to figure out where we were going to be able to put those major pieces. It's like he just wants to sap even more time from Arjun Erigaisi and still keep the majors on the board and keep things as complex as possible. That's the explanation I can think of. I'm not sure there's anything else that makes sense at this point.
One pair of rooks are off the board, but why does weaken the king a little bit, you know, allowing Arjun perhaps the possibility to try to create some counterplay if the queen ever got in. That's why he says, that's not happening. Queen's off the board. This has got to be winning for Alireza now.
This has to be winning. Every bit of endgame wisdom we've ever been taught tells us that knight endgames are like pawn endgames. Imagine the knights are off the board. How do you evaluate that? Winning for white. 2 versus 1 on the queen side. We saw that earlier in their first game as well. With knights on the board, it's a bit more tricky. You need to avoid forks, but ultimately the knights should cancel each other out, and the white pawns should be running. He keeps going for this strategy. Win a pawn on the queen side, push those pawns, and tie down the opponent's knight. That worked in game 1. Will he get a win again in game 3 here? Alireza, the knight landing on the edge of the board. It should re-centralize in a moment, but Arjun down at 1 minute. That just compounds the misery.
Yeah, that's crucial now. It's going to be 2.5 minutes, playing just over 1 minute for the conclusion of this game. Remember, especially in time trouble, anything can happen. This really is high tension, especially for Erigaisi. It might be savable, but I think we're talking minor miracles kind of territory now.
Only a miracle can save Arjun in this. You know, the clock down under 1 minute now. It's gone red, but it's the least of his problem. That knight attacking the a6 pawn ties down the black knight. The white king now has a clear path ahead. Go on those dark squares, walk up the board. It needs to be stopped. King e5, king d6. That would be game over for Arjun Erigaisi.
Yeah, this is just a mathematical equation. White has an extra pawn. That pawn is going to cost black the knight. And white's going to have plenty of pawns left to promote and end this game. For now, the white king's road forward is blocked, but 2 minutes, plays under 1 minute still. Alireza here has plenty of time to conjure up a new plan.
And the new plan would involve getting the king inside the action. That is what he wants. He tries it from another route. He gets the king closer to the pawns. And what Arjun is trying to create is a passer of his own. If that f-pawn gets 1 step forward, there will be counterplay. Good enough or not, nobody knows, but it will force Alireza to think.
Ooh, he walks forward with his pawns, Alireza Firouzja. He's calculated that his pawn is racing through. If the black knight captures, the white knight will be hitting the e6 pawn in the process. It just feels too slow. Arjun's lacking the time to give up his knight and remove the rest of the pawns from the board. He will not get those trades, not get those pass pawns that he needs to create counterplay.
Just too slow on that right side and too slow on the clock. Now under 25 seconds, Arjun Erigaisi, he's considering that resignation button. Or will he play on? Will he find a way to keep this endgame going?
Hopeless, there's too many pawns. He tries one last trick, his only trick remaining, but look how that black pawn is too slow. The black knight was hit, now a capture. It's 4 versus 1 in terms of pawns. Arjun moves across to hit that resign button. Alireza takes a second win in this match.
Fantastic job applying the pressure, getting that additional pawn and converting that pressure into a victory. Firouzja takes this game and he moves within a win of a semi-final victory and moving on to the grand final. Still all to play for, but 2.5 to a half is an extremely strong score.